Hey guys, so we are going to do a quick video on origins of life. This one, I promise, is actually quick. I always say that in the beginning of the videos, but this one really is not that long. So on the origins of life, cell theory. We talked about cells before when we talked about organization of animals in general. So with cells, we said they were the smallest unit of life. So all life is made out of cells, and that all cells are going to come from pre-existing cells. That cells aren't just going to poof, come out of nowhere and you got cells. That's not how it works. So where did the cell first come from? Where did the first one come from? That's what this video is for, on origins of animals. So there are two theories. Let's talk about them. The first, panspermia, and that is where I've got a few videos here, but I want to say the videos, you can only see them if you log into the library, because they are films on demand videos that you can only watch on the library website. So you gotta log into the library first before these Galileo films on demand videos work. This one I want to say is YouTube though, so you should be able to watch this one on panspermia. But basically, what it is that it is the theory that life came from outside of Earth, and those foundational units, the beginnings of life, the elements needed to form all of life and cells and all of that stuff, the basic building blocks came from space. So that's what panspermia is. So a meteor, some sort of meteor shower, asteroid, cosmic dust somehow made it into our atmosphere, and that's what seeded the earth with the building blocks needed for life. That's panspermia. So that is one theory, that the earth was basically sterile, and then matter that was not found on Earth came to the planet, and that's what started the spark of life. And eventually, over long periods of time, that evolved into life cells. That's panspermia. So that's theory number one. And definitely watch the video for a little more detail on that theory. The other theory is that life originated on Earth. It's always been on Earth, and we didn't care what's going on outside of our little planet. All we care about is what's going on here. So life on Earth started on Earth. It's always been like this. But life on early Earth was terrible. It was not like it is now with, my background on Chihuahua, bald behind me on the Appalachian Trail. That was not around billions of years ago when the Earth was first formed. So the Earth is 4.6 billion with a B years old. That's how old the Earth is. And back then, it did not look like this. It was nasty. It did not have life everywhere. There's nothing green. We didn't have photosynthesizers, none of that. It was toxic. We didn't have the atmosphere like we have now. Oxygen levels were not near like they are now. It was filled with really nasty gas, hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, methane. All of this was really common back then, and we know this because we can go through the layers of rock if you're into geology, and you can see the different layers and go back in time, literally back in time through the rocks, and see what was prevalent, a million years ago, 100 million years ago, what was happening then, what settled into the rock system at that point. Other things that were going on back in earlier, volcanoes spewing this nasty stuff into the air, meteors coming down, solar radiation, because again, we did not have the atmosphere like we have now with our ozone layer and all that stuff, clouds, that wasn't there, and lightning strikes. So it was really not a pleasant place back then. So come to our second theory. This experiment, the second theory is that life was started on Earth, and that Miller-Urey aimed to prove it, that they could prove that life began on Earth. So what did they do? I've got a video here walking you through it, but they basically created a very crude, basic Earth system back then. So they recreated the ocean, and they, have our Bunsen burner flame that is recreating the heat. So we talked about how, volcanoes were up and the Earth's covered with water. and volcanoes were spewing all this toxic gas through there and boiling the water up. So they were creating a little mini atmosphere of the water cycle. So they're boiling this up. They are including different gases in the atmosphere. I want to say it was methane, ammonia, and something else in there. I can't remember. I'm pulling a blank. And then the lightning, they simulated lightning, so they electrified it, zapped it, and using this experiment, they created a primitive Earth. And what happened at the end? So they heated up the water, the steam comes up, the steam gets exposed to the air that has these different gases in it that were recreating the primitive Earth atmosphere then. We're going to electrify it like lightning, and then the other part of the water cycle, it gets cold, and then it's going to rain down from the sky, right? So we're going to cool down the cooling chamber, and we're going to see what ends up at the bottom. And at the bottom, they were able to recreate amino acids. And amino acids are the building blocks for proteins. And so when we talk about macromolecules, there's carbohydrates that we know and love. There are lipids, the fats that we need in everything. Oh, excuse me, gosh, to be honest. And then, excuse me, carbs, lipids. There are going to be proteins, and there's also nucleic acids. Those are our 4 macros that we usually talk about in majors bio and bio 1010. So amino acids, they were able to produce those using this very primitive Earth experiment. So this is the Miller-Urey experiment trying to prove that life could come from Earth. We didn't have to have, stardust here to give us what we needed. We could make it here. So Miller-Urey proved that we could form some basics given this experiment recreating the gases that we think were present at the time. How did we get the first cells? Every cell has a cell membrane. Whether you are a bacteria, an archaea, or a eukaryote like us, there is a cell membrane to contain the stuff inside. So one of the theories is that that cell membrane formed from clay, from just basic clay. When it is wet, certain types of clay can form these vesicles that act as primitive cell membranes, that act as little passive packages to house baby cells. So these are theories. Life came from space, panspermia, or life was always on Earth, and that was being able to show that that theory exists because of Miller-Urey and their experiment. Once life started to form, we had the prokaryotes, and that was bacteria domain and archaea domain. And the prokaryotes came along, and eventually they started to evolve, and some of those prokaryotes became photosynthesizer. So life began on the planet 3.5 billion years ago, and the Earth is 4.6. So over 1 billion years passed before life formed. So it took 1 billion years for life to form on Earth. And then at 3.5, we started getting the prokaryotes, our first living cells. And then eukaryotes didn't come on the scene until 1.8 billion years ago. Those were eukaryotes. So some of our prokaryotes, thankfully, are photosynthesizers. And what do plants and photosynthetic bacteria produce as their byproduct? We are not photosynthesizers. On our carbon cycle, we're doing the opposite. But with photosynthesizers, they are going to take in the energy from the light, right? And they're going to combine it with CO2 and water, and what gets produced is going to be glucose for their cells and oxygen. So with these photosynthesizers that came along billions of years ago, they produce oxygen, and that oxygen terraformed the Earth. The whole Earth changed once these photosynthesizers came on the scene, and the oxygen levels then started to spike up. They're actually lower than they were. They did kind of do a little peak, and now they're a little bit lower now, present day. But oxygen levels got high, and there were organisms out there that can't tolerate oxygen. They're anaerobic, and sometimes oxygen kills them. So this was a drastic change when photosynthesizers came on the scene in the Earth's history. The photosynthesizers terraformed the Earth, producing the oxygen that's in the atmosphere to change the Earth into what we know of it today. Made a huge difference. Another thing, we talked about those membrane-bound organelles. So our nucleus, that holds all of our DNA inside of it, we have a nucleus. So we are eukaryotes, where the prokaryotes don't have that membrane-bound organelle. So our archaea and bacteria, they don't. They have a nucleoid. So here's our primitive archaea inside, trapped, and eventually we kept it as eukaryotes. This is the endosymbiotic theory, where we believe that mitochondria, which are our powerhouses, that's going to help us with our aerobic respiration. Mitochondria were originally aerobic bacteria, so they were going to use oxygen as part of their metabolism to do the things that they needed to do, to be able to, you know, make proteins and do all the things that a cell needs to do. Originally, we believe it was aerobic bacteria that came upon a different type of cell, and that different type of cell said, hey, come on in. I'm going to give you a home where you'll be safe and nobody's going to eat you. And in turn, in exchange, you're going to produce all this glucose for me. And so this, we absorbed it. We kept the mitochondria. They are our powerhouse for our eukaryotic cells. Same for this guy. This was a photosynthetic bacterium, and we said those guys are going to harvest the energy, take in energy, CO2, and water, and in exchange, they are going to create glucose, sugar for the plant, and oxygen as a byproduct. So plants, photosynthetic plants, they have chloroplasts. So our mitochondria and our chloroplasts, the little green guys over here, chloroplasts, these were previously bacteria. We know they're bacteria because they also have, bacteria have their own ribosomes. Everything that's living has to have ribosomes because it can't have central dogma. You can't go DNA to RNA and amino acids without ribosomes. So mitochondria and chloroplasts have their own DNA inside of them and their own ribosomes. So that is further proof that these guys were originally bacteria. They got absorbed into the eukaryotic cell and we kept them. So this is called the endo, because we brought them inside, symbiotic, because both parties are having a mutual, both parties win, relationship. Again, mitochondria and chloroplasts, they have their own DNA. They're going to have their own ribosomes and transfer RNA. And how do they divide? They divide by binary fission, and that's how bacteria divide. They will copy their DNA, and the DNA will go to different sides of their cell, and the cell gets larger, and then they split. They will split with binary fission. They form a little ring, and then they separate, and that's how they perform their cellular reproduction is binary fission, and that's how chloroplasts do it, and mitochondria too. So there's lots of supporting evidence that support the endosymbiotic theory. If you have questions about this very brief video, I promise you it's going to be brief, and it is. Let me know. Shoot me an email. Thanks.